From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on January 27th, 2025 from South Carolina Public Radio studios here in Columbia. On this episode of The Lede, we catch up with Senator Lindsey Graham, who was in Columbia talking about budget reconciliation, immigration, infrastructure funding, and his view on presidential pardons. The U.S. Attorney's Office for South Carolina has detained a man who allegedly sextorted Representative Brandon Guffey's son, who took his own life as a result. We have details on that. And I bring you part of my interview with U.S. Attorney Adair Ford Burroughs, and we look at a very busy week in Columbia. They're back, folks. They are back. The Lede also wants to hear from you, 803-563-7169. That is our phone number. Give us a shout. Let us know what you're thinking about. The Super Bowl is coming up, guys. The Super Bowl, and you know who's in it. I don't need to explain anymore. We'll probably talk about this in the wind down. A certain bird, America's bird, whatever. They stole it. Anyway, should have been a turkey. 803-563-7169. Let's talk sports in the wind down. It's my new thing. Let's take a look at what's on tap for this week in the State House. State lawmakers are back in Columbia, and it's going to be a hectic week here. We'll have more on those big meetings that we'll be following and recapping for you in Saturday's pod in a moment. Looking at the governor's schedule, the governor, the first lady, and lieutenant governor participated in a commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz at USC on Monday. The governor will give his State of the State address Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. You can watch that on SCE TV online or listen over South Carolina Public Radio. We'll be anchoring that at 7 p.m. Up in Congress, they're also back this week, and there are several high-profile confirmation hearings in the Senate, including Health and Human Services nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Wednesday, and FBI nominee Kash Patel on Thursday, along with former Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who's a nominee for the Director of National Intelligence. So the big Thursday there. We'll be watching. Looking at the economic calendar, the Federal Open Market Committee meets on Wednesday to discuss interest rates. Fed Chair Jay Powell will hold a press conference that afternoon. Not expecting much to happen there. And on the Sunday shows, well, Senator Lindsey Graham was on Meet the Press and CNN's State of the Union, but he came to Columbia where he had a press conference on Monday. So instead of playing you the greatest hits from the Sunday shows, we got to talk with him. That's right, I got to speak with the senior senator along with some other members of the Columbia Press Corps on a variety of topics, including using the budget reconciliation process to get massive laws passed. Graham said Republicans have only had this opportunity 4 times in the past century, and they can't squander this moment. He was over the Senate Budget Committee, which puts him at ground zero for all this activity. Take a listen.
What am I trying to accomplish? I would like the Budget Committee to pass a budget resolution that would provide $100 billion to secure the border, hire more ICE agents to track down the criminals, create more detention beds so you don't have to let people go. I'd like to give $200 billion to the military so they can modernize to better compete against China. I want to do that as a single standalone bill. If you do the one big beautiful bill, the tax policy is complicated. I also want spending cuts. Let's put that exercise off to later in the year because it's going to take till later in the year to figure out how to do it. The $200 billion and the $100 billion will be paid for. I'm going to find cuts in other parts of the government to offset this spending. Budget reconciliation allows me, as the budget chairman, to make these decisions. In 1974, we created a law that allows budget reconciliation. You spend more in one area, you reduce spending in others. You can do this with a majority vote. Why is this so important? The only way we'll ever get money to secure the border the way Donald Trump would like, President Trump, is to do it through reconciliation. Democrats are not ever going to give us the money we need to do what President Trump wants on the border and deportation. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Republicans and Republicans only to give President Trump the money he needs to execute his immigration plan. If we don't take advantage of this, we got nobody to blame but ourselves. So I would like to start this in the next 2 weeks. I would like by the end of February, early March at the latest, to have passed, through reconciliation, funding for the border.
It's important to note that Graham said 2025 is a critical year for major Trump priorities to get passed ahead of the 2026 midterms. And without getting major wins this year, it could hurt folks down the road. But in this clip, we're going to continue talking about budget reconciliation. Make it cool. Got to listen. You will hear Graham setting up a little bit of the conflict with how the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and House Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith want one big, beautiful bill, like you heard, versus Graham's two-bill approach. Now, House leaders are meeting with Trump today, Monday evening, but Graham, who was in the House from 1995 till 2003, and then in the Senate since then, well, he knows a thing or two about how things work in Washington.
I am focused like a laser on this. I want to make the tax cuts permanent, but we have time to do that. So that's what I'm trying to do as budget chairman, is start the process now. And the House is meeting today. Now, I respect Mike Johnson as much as anybody I've ever met in Washington. But this idea of linking them all together, I think, is a risky idea.
It has to come from the House, correct?
The taxes do, but money for the border and the military can start in the Senate. I can't start a reconciliation process affecting the tax code because of the revenue spending, but I can do border and military in the Senate first. And I'm getting so many calls from House members, go do it. House members want to go put points on the board. They want to be able to tell their constituents that we provided the money to President Trump to do what he promised to do. We made promises on this above all others, that we would quickly go after the criminal illegal immigrants and get them out of here. Colombia. Any country that doesn't work with us is going to pay a heavy price. There's a new sheriff in town. When Colombia pushed back that we were going to send back to Colombia people who came here illegally, they said they're not going to take them. Well, that lasted about 5 minutes.
Graham had mentioned the roughly $200 million from the Federal Railroad Commission to help the city of Columbia address trains that cut off the downtown, the bane of my existence, folks. But that's a separate podcast. But I wanted to know what he thought about President Donald Trump's executive order to pause infrastructure funds going to the states from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which Graham voted for, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which he didn't.
We need to go look at the bill that the president put on pause. A lot of the money, I think, is just claw it back and spend it on the border.
You just heard him saying claw that back for immigration. And I asked him later to clarify that response in terms of whether he meant COVID money being clawed back or all that infrastructure money, stuff for roads, bridges, broadband, etc. Here's Senator Graham again.
I think mostly the COVID money, yeah. See, I voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Round 2 was not about infrastructure. It was more social engineering.
Graham was also asked about Trump's pardons for January 6 rioters, including those that assaulted police officers, and his concern about what message that sends.
Yeah, I understand, the ones who beat up cops. I've been in this business for quite a while. From day one, I've always had the police officers back. I don't want to do anything that would invite violence against those who risk their lives every day to protect us. So I don't like anything, no matter, even if a friend does it, that would send the wrong signal. So until I leave this job, I will do everything I can to support the police, and we don't want to encourage violence.
Moving on, Mayan Schechter was in federal court Monday here in Columbia covering the extradition of a Nigerian man to the United States after being indicted in the sextortion of Gavin Guffey, who's a 17-year-old from Rock Hill who died by suicide in July 2022 after being victimized by Hassan Ban Hussein, Abalor Lawal. The U.S. Attorney's Office of South Carolina said Lawal allegedly posed as a young woman on social media and coerced the teen into sending compromising photos. He then extorted and sent harassing messages to Guffey, threatening to leak the photos and ruin his reputation unless the teen sent him money. Gavin was the son of state lawmaker Republican Representative Brandon Guffey, who was elected the same year to represent part of Rock Hill. Guffey got a bipartisan sextortion law named after his son through the State House in 2023. Guffey and others were in the Columbia Federal Courthouse and part of a press conference afterwards. But first, here's U.S. Attorney Adair Ford Burroughs.
Today, our pursuit of justice and accountability takes a major step forward. Lawal was extradited from Nigeria and brought here to Columbia to face charges. I hope the message is clear. If you use the internet to exploit children in our state, you will be held accountable here in our courts. We will not allow predators to hide behind a keyboard or across an ocean.
Through tears, Representative Guffey addressed the media in a press conference about the continued moves to bring his son's perpetrators to justice.
It's just the beginning of the next fight. It's time for us to really send that message. We brought Lawal here to hold him accountable for his crimes, and we will continue to fight to not only save kids like Gavin, but to save any additional kids that might feel the way that Gavin did before he took his life.
The 5-count federal indictment charges Lawal with child exploitation resulting in death, the production and distribution of child sexual abuse material, coercion and enticement of a minor, cyberstalking resulting in death, interstate threats with intent to extort, and aiding and abetting. In addition to victimizing the teen in every count, the indictment alleges Lawal targeted the minor victim's family in the stalking and extortion charges. He faces up to life in prison and a mandatory minimum of 30 years if convicted on child exploitation resulting in death. Burroughs had this advice, and for all my parents listening, please listen to this, take note of this, and talk to your children.
Parents and caregivers, please start this conversation with your children. Predators are on social media platforms, they are on gaming sites, they are online in chat rooms. Anywhere where you can communicate with people on the internet, you will find predators. Explain to children that strangers online may not be who you think they are. Tell your children never to share personal information like their real name, their school, their home address, or photos with strangers online. And if they find themselves in a difficult situation, talk to a trusted adult.
Speaking of federal court and outgoing U.S. Attorney Adair Ford Burroughs, I spoke with her last week about her tenure, accomplishments, and potential next moves after leaving this prominent position. Burroughs was former President Joe Biden's pick for U.S. Attorney for South Carolina, and she was installed back in July 2022. Now, even with the change of administrations last Monday to Republican President Donald Trump, she is still in this position until told otherwise. There will be another nominee for this position appointed by President Trump. It will be a Republican, but that's a little TBD right now. We're speculating who that might be, but I sat down with Burroughs last week. And just so you guys know, U.S. Attorney for the state, her office is made up of 140 people who oversee all prosecutions of federal crimes within South Carolina, which is why they were involved in that one we were just talking about. There's also been some high-profile cases, including securing 5 federal hate crime convictions, such as the case of United States versus DeQual Ritter, the first federal trial in the nation under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd R. Hate Crimes Prevention Act for a hate crime murder based on gender identity. I asked her what some of the highlights of her tenure were during my interview with her on This Week in South Carolina.
So we're really proud of our civil rights work over the last few years. We had 5 hate crime convictions over kind of 2 cases, including the first trial in the country related to the murder of someone based on their gender identity. We've done a lot in the violent crime space and gangs and gun violence and been really strategic there and trying to make our prosecutions have impact in the community and driving down crime. So that's been a really big one. And then, of course, we've seen just influx of fentanyl and drugs in the state that we've been trying to tackle. And there's so much in the purview of the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's so critical. We have sextortion cases, child exploitation cases, just a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, because you're working with all those federal partners, the FBI, other federal agencies within the state that operate here to prosecute all these cases, investigate these cases. So when we talk about the hate crimes, for example, tell us about those and why those are so significant when it comes to prosecuting them in South Carolina, where we don't have a hate crimes law.
Well, you just said it. That's exactly why at the federal level, I think it's more important in our district than maybe some other districts, because if we don't do it, no one will. And that was a really important thing for me when we were deciding what to prioritize and how to spend resources. If there's someone else that can and will do this work, that's one thing, but when we're the only ones able to do it, it means we're the only ones able to protect the public in those spaces. And so it was really important, from my perspective, not only to work those cases, but also let the public know that we do that. So many members of the public do not know what the U.S. Attorney's Office is, and we did a number of community events where we were going out and educating the public, and I started every one of those events with, is there a hate crimes law that can be enforced here in the state of South Carolina? And resoundingly, unanimously, every audience would tell me no. And so we were doing a lot to let people know there is one that can be enforced. It's federal, and so it's really crucial that the public report those crimes to the FBI.
And when we talk about that federal hate crimes law, Adair, is it harder to get those crimes, investigated and prosecuted at the federal level versus if we had a state law? Would it be easier, or what's the hang up there? Because it sounds like I talked to law enforcement. It sounds like sometimes they could have more communication, they'd have more resources available if there was a state law versus a citizen pretty much directly having to go to the FBI or maybe law enforcement having to initiate that.
It would always depend on what the text of the state hate crimes law would be about whether it would be more expensive than the federal ones. But just from a resource standpoint, it never hurts to have more tools in your toolbox as it goes. And at the federal level, we do have 68 attorneys statewide, civil and criminal. So there's only so many cases we can take. There's only so much we can do. And so there's always going to be some amount of limited resources there.
Because a lot of people say we don't need any more laws. We have enough laws on the books. So what's your argument to that when they say that when it comes to hate crimes?
Oh, well, the hate crime statute and enforcing it is particularly important, I think, because of the impact on the community. If you have a murder that is someone's being murdered out of rage because a significant other cheated, that's one thing. When you have someone that's murdered because of their religion or the color of their skin,
being transgender,
and when it's done in a way that really invokes fear and terror in a community, it's a similar kind of theory as to why terrorism is different than murder in general, is because you're trying to invoke terror. And a lot of these hate crimes, if you think about like Dylan Roof, they're trying to invoke kind of terror in the community. And so I think needs a special level of enforcement and care.
And when you look at law enforcement challenges in South Carolina, what are the biggest ones facing us right now? We were just talking about hate crimes. We're talking about guns on the streets. You're talking about gangs and fentanyl. People are talking about the border. There's a lot of concerns about immigration. What do you see as your days wind down at the U.S. Attorney's Office in South Carolina? What do you see as the biggest challenges for your successor?
Yeah, I think gun violence and the ubiquity of guns is a real problem. When I came into this job, I spoke to sheriffs and to chiefs, to federal law enforcement officers, to the bench and community groups. And no matter who I talked to, guns was the problem, firearms. And we are seeing now machine conversion devices, little pieces of plastic that you can stick on a gun and turn them into automatic weapon that is frankly not controllable. Even trained law enforcement officers have difficulty controlling firearms once they have these machine conversion devices. A lot of people call them switches on firearms. And we have juveniles getting their hands on firearms and on these switches. And it can just wreak havoc in our community, and it costs us a lot of life. And so I think that's something that is going to continue to be a problem in the state as we see those devices especially coming. It's going to make all shootings more lethal.
And are those legal as it stands right now?
No.
Okay, so they're illegal then.
Yes, those are illegal.
But you're just seeing them more and more often.
They are, and they're small, and so it's not like finding, it's not like the old days in the 1930s when you find a machine gun, you know, now you're talking about very small pieces of plastic that can often be difficult to recognize.
And then even ghost guns too are a big concern, I'm sure. And then we have a few minutes left. I want to ask you about this need to investigate these investigations into the conditions at the Alvin S. Green Detention Center here in Richland County and the Al Cannon Detention Center in Charleston County, two of the biggest counties in our state, two of the biggest jails, seemingly the worst jails. What was the cause for these investigations, and what have you learned, at least from the Richland County investigation at this point?
Yeah, so the causes on both were the number of complaints and the severity of complaints that we received. We received dozens. We were looking at deaths and severe serious injury. And so I think everyone here, at least in the Midlands, knew Alvin S. Glenn was bad. But the question we had to ask, is it unconstitutionally bad? And so the investigation was really to get the facts about what was happening. And what we learned is that the violence in Alvin S. Glenn is really atrocious. And you're seeing that people at Alvin S. Glenn are really living in terror and fear for their lives with the amount of violence that's happening at the jail.
That was outgoing U.S. Attorney for South Carolina, Adair Ford Burrows. As for what she'll be doing after leaving this position, well, she told me, stay tuned. She wants to stay in the public sphere. Now, also in that last question I did ask her, I was talking about the Richland County Prison, Alvin S. Glenn. I think I said Green, but we're talking about the detention center. And the conditions at those facilities should definitely make you think twice before doing anything that could get you in trouble with the law, folks. But let's go to the State House. Some meetings and bills to watch this week. And a note from the State House gavel, your go-to guide every Tuesday through Friday for all things under the copper cupola in Columbia, compiled by the most senior State House team covering the General Assembly, which you can find on sectv.org/news. And this note is on bills. You and me and bills. I did some number crunching for you guys. A little fun fact, a little Gavin's tidbit here.
Great.
Now, all those pre-filed bills that we were seeing float around December, well, they've all been read across their respective chambers' desks and assigned to committees. And for a majority of them, that is the most action they will ever see. Sorry. Sorry. We're talking about 650 bills that were pre-filed in the House and 200 plus in the Senate. On average, 3,800 bills get filed during a 2-year session.
Wow.
And on average, 250 get signed into law.
Wow.
Doing some light math, back of the napkin math here, which I can easily do. That's about 7%.
Wow.
7% of bills filed actually make it to the governor's desk for his signature. Now, for the sake of easy math, please disregard the hundreds of congratulatory resolutions that are filed and get rubber stamped in their respective chamber. This is my equation. So let's look at some bills that are moving this week. Looking at Senate meetings on these bills, including Senate Minority Leader Brad Hutto's Bill S-180, which deals with intimate partner violence, that expands the definition of a household member to include those dating who can obtain an order of protection against abusers. There's a similar bill, S-143, that's also going through a Judiciary Subcommittee Tuesday afternoon, as well as a bipartisan bill, S-28, dealing with AI child abuse material. Sticking with the Senate meetings, of note on Wednesday at 10 a.m., there will be a joint meeting on the state's energy future that was originally scheduled for last week. Later that day will be another subcommittee hearing on requests for proposals for VC Summer and its future. Yay, a little boondoggle, just a little bit there, gang. Thursday morning, a medical affairs subcommittee will debate S2, which will consolidate 3 state health agencies into the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. This would include the Department of Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Services, DAODAS, Disabilities and Special Needs, and the Department of Mental Health would all be in one under this one bill. A previous bill died at the very end of last session. And in the Senate, on the floor, the debate over the school voucher bill S-62 is ongoing. Let's move over to the House. There are lots of committee meetings, including ongoing House Ways and Means Budget Subcommittee hearings. Yes, a lot of those as they're crafting the budget. That's what the House is doing right now. But also, there will be another hearing on the House Energy Bill, H-3309, that morning. And Treasurer Curtis Loftus, the Comptroller General and State Auditor, will be before the Constitutional Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee. This is another little boondoggle mention. Don't worry, I know you guys are obsessed with all this stuff. We'll be bringing you some details in Saturday's pod about this hearing and more. But also, some other things happening. That afternoon on Wednesday, we're going to see hearings, including one on the Organized Retail Theft Bill, H-3523. On Thursday morning, we'll see 2 Convention of States bills dealing with a balanced budget amendment for the federal government and term limits, H-3007 and H-3008, respectively. And then there's also a hearing on Thursday, H-3276, a bill that would outlaw holding a phone while driving. Just because we have the no text law I know you guys are still holding your phones. If you're driving right now, put your phone down. Unless you're calling the show, but then do it hands-free. Thanks. Welcome to the wind down section, our little break from the news. We're always glad you're here. Our chance to talk about all things, including football, with A.T. Shire, producer of the Lead Podcast. A.T., hello. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, baby.
This is not part of anything we discussed.
Ooh, yeah, baby.
I'm about to put the I can't even say Redskins. I can't. Do the Commanders have hail anymore? What do we do?
Yeah, I'll shut it off. It's okay. But
yeah, you're like, please don't retaliate.
We won. I knew we would.
Congratulations.
55 points. 55 points even.
It was exciting that we got to text on a Sunday during the football game. You're like, not
Gavin?
yet. I'm like, baby, I already know it's over.
Gavin consumed more football product than I did.
I've never watched so much pre-game coverage, mostly because I was with my dad and he couldn't figure out where the golf
That's what
tournament
I was
was on, and we should have been watching that, but I was just like, I know that the Eagles have the best defensive line in NFL right now.
Thank you.
I know that the Commanders haven't been in NFC
31 years.
since 1992.
Yes, long time.
So I was learning a lot, and Daniels, the 24-year-old quarterback for the Commanders,
Stud.
just has such a great. Tom Brady says stud a lot.
He's a stud.
I'm also totally. And then, so I was just
Brady
learning
is
a lot.
not a stud. He's a terrible announcer.
Yeah,
Really
I
bad.
feel like he said a lot of things that I was thinking. So I'm like, if I'm the one who's thinking those things,
Yeah,
that's pretty low level.
It's a layup. Yeah.
And then also your boy, the offensive line center,
Who was hurt.
out,
Landon
so
Dickerson filled in.
So I was like, I was
great.
very
love this,
up.
Gavin.
I was
I
very
love
up on
talking
a lot of things.
Yes.
Again, kind of going back, like it's not that I don't like sports or football specifically. It's that I just can't get that emotionally invested in something. However, if there's money on the line, which I did not have because I don't gamble anymore.
it's
Ever since I lost so much.
Since your incident.
No, I just do legalized gambling on the stock market. But no, obviously, with the Commanders,
Well, it's been your entire life that they've been bad.
And yeah, so it's always been hard. I do remember as a child, I think in kindergarten, that would have been around that
I
time
like
when
that.
we were doing
Yeah.
the chant in schools because they were a hot team.
They won the Super Bowl in the 90s, early 90s.
And then Dan Snyder just
Absolute scum of the earth, man.
put a cloud over that team.
I did. A pall, even. Gavin, I saw you. Gavin texted me when it started.
A pox.
A pox upon you. During the game, when the Eagles really started to run away with it, Gavin texted me. He said, "Is this what despair feels like?" And I was like, "Yes."
I was working through all the feelings
It
that
is.
you recount for me about your house. And,
I feel terrible.
Kaylin, pacing, and then
She felt bad the whole game. Even when 20 points was not enough of a cushion for her.
Sure.
And then there was 2 minutes left and they were up over 30. And
Yeah.
she's like, "Don't say that they won yet." And I was like,
because
we can
I think one of the announcers made a good point at the top of the fourth where it was like, they came back, the Commanders had come back before in that situation by some 20-some points. But
Yeah, but that's
I
rare.
I knew in that first moment with the Eagles, their first offensive play, I was like, oh.
That was great.
When
Yeah.
that came out, because I saw them do that the time before, and I was like,
Yeah.
this is done.
Saquon's done it more than anyone ever has in a season before. He's a freak. He's a stud. We
But
love
it's
him
good
so
because
much.
that will get the Commanders, that will get them going for next year. They're like, okay, let's bring the momentum again.
They're going to be good. You have
so-
a good young quarterback.
And so at this point, I will say I do want your Eagles to win for the
Thank
Super
you.
Bowl.
You want to have lost to the winner.
I
the
want
best
you
team.
to be happy.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm wearing.
And I'm assuming you would have said the same for me at the
I'm
Commanders.
wearing a jersey. I'm
He's wearing
my,
a jersey today, which
my
I'm like,
brand
oh,
new-
you're a grown man wearing another grown man's
I
jersey.
Am. Yes, I am.
I'll let you do it.
Yes, that's my new one. I got it for Christmas. Brandon Graham, love him so much.
Just for scheduling sake, folks, when the Super Bowl parade does take place.
If it happens, that we're not putting the horse or the cart in front of the
I know,
horse.
but maybe I'm trying to.
Gavin's trying to pox me. He's trying to put a paw on me.
Should something happen where AT needs to leave the state to go celebrate?
Yeah.
Just
You
be
will
wary
not-
of that, folks.
Programming may alter.
Programming may be altered.
May be altered.
Or we'll get a
We don't
live
know.
report from the streets of Philadelphia.
Yeah, that would be dangerous.
Everyone's happy here.
Everybody's
the polls are greased.
The best story I have is, speaking of parades, in 2008 when the Phillies won the World Series, I went to the parade.
Mm-hmm.
And across the street was a derelict building that was boarded up. And a bunch of people broke into it, kicked out the boards so they could watch the parade. And after about 20 minutes of everyone talking like, oh, look at them, look at them, and look at them, the cops went in and cleared the building, kicked everyone out of it. And then 2 minutes before the parade got there, all the windows were filled with cops. And they went in where they kicked all the people out, so they had amazing views of the parade.
They had to make sure that everyone was maintaining order.
I just got to make sure, I can see from above and have great views of this.
Could have been a lot worse. Follow the law, guys. You do not want to end up at Elfinus Glen.
No, that's where they send you from Philadelphia.
From Philadelphia.
Yeah,
they extradite you.
They bust you out.
God knows what it's like in jail in Philadelphia. I was wondering that too. I was like, oh, there's got to be so many fights and things that happened on Sunday just because of the rivalry and the closeness.
I would say maybe the opposite, where the cops and the robbers in Philadelphia, everyone was dialed into the Eagles. And so, go Birds here and there can solve any situation.
Unless you're, a cluster of Commanders fans, and then it's like, God knows what happens. And that's what I'm just like, I can't do this.
I saw a very sad story because no bar in Philadelphia would allow Commanders fans to gather, except the downtown Hard Rock Cafe. And so they bragged about taking over the Hard Rock. And there was one guy who was in charge of the whole thing. And they found him in the stadium the next day.
Oh, my God.
And when he was leaving early because they were getting the brakes beaten off him, they were like, hey, congrats on taking over the Hard Rock, buddy. And they were just ragging on him and razzing him so hard. I felt really bad for him. You just got to get out of there. They found the team bus, the Commanders team bus. They chased it down.
There you go. All the wonderful hospitality of the city of brotherly love. Rolling my eyes and trying not to swear right now.
There was one good thing. Beforehand, they did an local interview with a lady who was blessing the field. And she had the thickest Philly accent. She goes, yeah, we brought our own holy water here to bless the field.
Of course, yeah, God knows what.
Yeah.
But, also, if you're looking for a sports bar in Philly to watch the Commanders game.
There you go.
It's so hard for me not to say it.
It's hard. It is.
Just drive on down to D.C.
It's close.
An hour and a half or something like that. Just go.
They represented
get out
pretty
of that horrible
well.
town and get there.
I would say there was a lot of McDonald's colors in the crowd.
Not a great color scheme.
It's bad color scheme. It looks like the high-end elite McDonald's employees. But there was like 30-40% of that stadium. And I love seeing them walk out early once they know the writing's on the wall and they've lost.
You need safe passage out of that horrible city, but
At least it's right next to the interstate. Easy hop on, hop off. South Philly.
Yeah, we love infrastructure in this podcast.
Oh, we do. I was gonna play your call, baby mama, but I talked too much about the Eagles. You're all in the sphere, okay? You're all in the sphere of influence. This is our team, okay?
What is this podcast becoming? We gotta get out of here.
This is why they listen.
Guys, you gotta call in 803-563-7169.
Brought around holy water.
Talk about the birds, gay birds.
Next episode, we're going over our favorite hoagie spots on South Street. Anyway, Gavin.
You're going to thank us for it. Trust me.
Take them out. Give them the credits.
All right,
Go Birds.
Stay up to date with the latest on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. And, of course, leave us a voicemail, 803-563-7169. Tell us who's going to win the Super Bowl. The South Carolina Lead is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Go Birds. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lead, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina. Is there a trick where, I can't engage them first?
Don't you cross that threshold.
No, I think it's okay right there in the hallway, in the light. I was invited in. I didn't invite you.